Good morning. If you want to see how we built this 4 by 4 square cherry kitchen table, stand by, because that's what we're going to be doing today. Well, welcome to another Memphis Monday, Memphis Sunday 192. Today we're going to be building a square cherry table. And I got Mr. Axe ready here because, you know, I like restoration projects, so I figure after I build the table, then I'll destroy it and then I'll fix it. How's that for a plan? Well, maybe we'll come up with a better plan. But instead of planning, let's knock off the chit-chat and get to work. This is our top. When I said it's a square table, it's 4 feet square, and this is cherry plywood with cherry edging around the outside. What I'm doing here is sanding off the plugs I have in the side. I'll show you that in just a second. You can see that the cherry plywood I got here has been laid out and it looks like almost in a board pattern. I put this 1.5 inch edging in here. You can still see one of my layup marks with biscuits. I put 5 biscuits in each side. Then I countersunk a hole into the 1.5 inch trim, about 3/4 of an inch, and drove a long screw through the trim and into the plywood. Before we build a table, we have to build a table jig, but before we build a table jig, we have to have some legs because part of the table jig is a mock-up of the legs, and so you have to have the exact dimensions of those legs. So this is my glue up for the legs. Let's take this apart and see how this turned out. There's our little stumpy legs for the table jig, and right over there, that's our stock for the, it's 3 1/4 square. It's got to about 33 inches now, but the final legs would be 29 1/4. Well, it's time to make the table jig, and this is the stock for the leg we're going to make the legs out of. And all the table jig is we take this leg away, and we have these duplicate stocks, only they're only 7.5 inches long, and then between our legs we put in this little spacer. So here's how the table jig attaches to this stumpy leg. You can see it's got this little piece of strapping on the inside here, and that takes up for the inset. Okay, you saw me planing frame boards. Now what I'm doing is I want to cut these things exactly. There you can see my mark, and I'm going to cut a little fat on it and then go try it and then walk it in. Now you can see that I cut a little fat, but not very much fat, but you know, we're talking a 1/16 of an inch down at the other end. So, okay, now since I cut that little fat, it shouldn't fit. It doesn't. I'll just take about 1/2 saw blade off. Okay, I took 1/2 saw blade off. Let's see if that helps us any. Perfect. I got all the internal pieces cut out for my frame, and I decided to add this internal square brace right in the, for additional support. This table is 4 feet across, and the legs are out on the corners. So I thought we needed a little bit extra support. Now I've got to pre-drill some holes in my frame here at the corner blocks, and also at this square brace in the center. Make tables and have to make these holes for these side blocks. This is the one I made for our project today. It just slides down in that slot, and I can drill right through those holes. I got my stop set on my Craig 2-step drill here. It just comes right down and just pierces the edge on the other side. I got all the countersunk all the screws in all the frame here, but now I'm worried about the finish. What I have here is the other half of our top over there. I'm going to be making a card table out of this later, and I'm going to practice sanding and try some different stain on it. And what I'm worried about is not the solid wood, but this veneer. Well, there's our experiment. Let's take a look. The first one is this color they call Traditional Cherry by Rustoleum. Looks pretty good, but it looks kind of blotchy. Second one is Minwax Penetrating Stain, just called Cherry. It doesn't seem dark enough to me. And this third one is Minwax Gel Stain, called Cherry Wood. So this fourth one is we're back to the Rustoleum Traditional Cherry, but our first sample over there was too blotchy, if you remember. So I used some of this Minwax Pre-Stain wood conditioner, which I'm dripping all over it there. Tapering the legs now. I normally use a homemade tapering jig, but this won't work. I have to use a regular tapering jig for this job because the wood is too tall. This is what a a tapering jig looks like. This is a store-bought one here. Most people build a homemade tapering jig like this. You just put a hinge, a couple of pieces of board and a hinge down here. Then you can adjust it for whatever angle. I've never made a homemade variable jig like this because I never use this kind. But in this case, I need to, so I'm going to go ahead and use this store-bought one. Taking the table jig off because I want to make sure my legs are all correctly aligned and nothing funny has happened. Another thing I got to check is that these hanger bolts are correctly placed. Well, I got the legs all shaped up with the router and sanding and all that business. I'm attaching them right now to the frame. Let's go over and take a look at that setup. The setup is pretty simple. The only difficulty is that if you make a mistake, if this hole isn't right that goes through the frame, or your hole isn't right that's in the leg, it can be a problem. So what we have to do now is we have to drill a hole into the leg for this end of the hanger bolt to go into. First thing to do is put a little 45-degree flat place here on the corner, and your hanger bolt is going to go in at a 45-degree angle, just like that. Then it's over to the drill press where I got this jig set up. It's just a 2x4 that's been cut at a 45-degree angle. That way I can put my piece in there and it's automatically going to line up. You know, the hole is going to go in at exactly a 45-degree angle. Then this bolt here, see, it just screws into that hole, and you can back it out or back it in to adjust the length of it when it comes out of the corner block. Okay, all the cutting and all the angles and everything came down to this. And then that'll tighten up just like that. Well, I just wanted to put it up on its legs to see what it's going to look like. What I'm doing is taking it apart. I only had it together with just a single screw in each joint. Well, that's pretty neat. I'll go ahead and try to put some of this stain on here. Well, there's our top. Didn't turn out too bad. Tell you what we're going to do, we're going to let this rest overnight. I'm going to turn my B52 on. I got the other parts stained also. Let that stain dry for overnight, and we can do some assembly in the morning. I'm not leaving you out here or anything. There just isn't a lot to see. I'm just putting screws in. One halfway interesting part is that each one of these blocks is held in place with 8 screws, including 2 that go down into the tabletop. So I think these corners will be nice and tight. I think the big reveal will be when we try to put these legs on, because before the frame wasn't tightened down. I just had a screw in every joint. So this thing is going to be slightly different geometry. I should have thought of that before. I don't know if the thing looked good as a table, but I really like the underside. It's a little Rube Goldberg, but you won't see it. And I think it really makes it strong. Let's try to get this thing on the floor without wrecking it. Piece of cake. Well, there's our little cherry table for Memphis Monday 192. Well, I guess that does it for another Memphis Monday 192. Today we built a square cherry kitchen table. We never did get to use Mr. Axe, but the reason I'm bringing up Mr. Axe is because hopefully next week we're going to make an awesome handle like this for just a cheap hammer. It's going to be a fun project. Like and share and tweet and comment and all the stuff you do on the internet. But most important, make sure you're back here next week for another exciting Memphis Monday. Thanks for playing along.